This starts page 317 in your text. This is actually a rather large chapter, and the first half will move at a regular pace through, and the second half will move a bit quicker because it's neat, cool stuff, but some of it's not quite yet widely supported, so it'll take another year or two to get there. Alright, we start off with the form element itself and some of the attributes that we need to pay attention to. The name just identifies the form. The action is important. This basically specifies the URL of the file that's going to process the form, or in the case of Apex, the script. And the method, it's going to be post or get. When method is get, you see the data in the URL. When it's post, it goes as part of the HTTP body, so you don't see it. Target is just like we saw before with the link. If target is blank, it'll open up in a new tab, but that's rather uncommon with form submissions. So you have the form, and the form basically encapsulates a bunch of input elements. The input elements have some pretty standard attributes, which we see here, starting with type. And common types are, button, text, checkbox. I'm not certain of it, but my guess is in the original days of HTML, it was quite literally that simple. You had an input element, and the type varied every single different type that was available. That's since changed. We now have additional elements, and input and others that you'll find in forms, but that's probably how it started. Name is here actually really important when it comes to a form, because when you submit a form, if it has a name value, it goes in the submission. That's important to know. We have disabled and read-only. These are attributes you can add to input elements. When something's disabled, it's actually quite different than read-only. When it's disabled, it doesn't get focus. The user can't really even touch it, but also it doesn't get submitted in the form when the post. Read-only, they're not supposed to be able to manipulate the value, but it does still go in the post. Be careful with both of these really, though, because it's possible to manipulate them as will become more obvious tomorrow. So here's a typical HTML form. You see the form encapsulating an input here. There's another input here. This one's actually a submit button, and the name value is what will go, the value is what will go to the post in this one. So this is how it would look in a browser. Now, if the action here actually says post, so if you were to submit this, you get name value pairs. Name would be email, value would be whatever the user put in that input. Name here would be submit, value would be subscribe. So two name value pairs would end up going to the server over here, this subscribe.php. It would go in a post, so you wouldn't actually see the name value pairs. They would just go as part of the HTTP body. But if the URL was submitting with get, it would look like this. So you see it goes to subscribe, question mark starts the query string, and this is where you see the name value pairs, and it will do encoding automatically. Button and input button element can be made by both input as well as a new button element, and they share some similar attributes. You have type, so what type of button is it? It's usually just going to be submit or reset, and submit's more common than reset. Reset just sets all the values of inputs within the form back to their defaults. And we have value. That's just the value of an input when the page renders, but it also could be modified when the page is submitted. Source, alt, height and width, we know what these are. If the type is image, it can be an image-based button, then you need source to point to the image, and alt if the image doesn't load. but that's very uncommon, really, these days. Here's some examples of how these would work. These are input buttons. So you see the input element is used, but the type varies. It could be button, reset, submit, image. And then there's this button element we have now, which a lot of folks prefer. Yet another way to make a button is to style an anchor into a button. There's tons of different ways to do it. But this one actually uses an image next to some text. If you render these in a browser, they'd look like this. I think the buttons that we have now in Apex are really nice looking. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the more common types of fields we work with in HTML. This is the input, but the type being text is what gives you a regular input. It could also be password or hidden, something along these lines that hidden they wouldn't see, for example. And browsers just have default ways of rendering these types of inputs. Value, again, is just what's going to be in the field when the page renders. It could be changed before submit. Max length. Max length just limits the number of characters the user can type into the field. Again, you have to watch out because that can change live. Size determines the size, but we should be using CSS for that now. We have autofocus and placeholder. Autofocus is new to HTML5, so is placeholder. This is a real simple attribute you can add, so when the page loads, it'll add the focus on that particular item. Placeholder is, I think, a bit better. It allows you to put sort of like an example in a field. Let me show you a couple of things, how this ties in with Apex.